Good afternoon, everybody. The webinar will begin very shortly. We'll just take a few moments to allow everybody to join. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm here in London, but I know we have a global audience joining us. So good morning, good afternoon, or possibly even good evening, wherever you are joining us from. And welcome to today's webinar, which is all about looking at skills across the public service and how we can really boost skills to drive reform. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is a publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world. In terms of today's topic, around the world, public servants and civil services are having to develop skills to make sure they are able to deliver services that citizens demand in the 21st century, and that they have the services that they need to drive reforms of their organisations themselves. Now, this challenge is particularly urgent in some of our younger democracies where maybe there isn't that history of skills development to drive reform for the good of the whole population. So today we're going to be looking at how some countries are boosting the skills of their public servants and their civil servants, and we'll be covering things like the key skills that public servants need to boost government capacity, from digital skills to policy making, technical skills, procurement, digital, project management, all of the skills kind of landscape. How governments and civil servants can anticipate the skills that their workforces are going to need to professionalise, and how to build those civil service values, those public service values of impartiality, integrity, honesty and objectivity across the workforces. We have 4 excellent speakers with us here today, and in a moment I'm going to introduce each of our speakers and I'm going to invite them to give some opening remarks. But there will be an opportunity after you have heard from our speakers to put your questions to the panel. So whichever device you are using, you should see somewhere on your screen, probably at the bottom of your screen, a Q&A button. Please use that Q&A function to message in any questions, any comments, any responses that you have to the things that you hear from our panel, and we'll get through as many of your questions and comments as we can by the end of the webinar. So now to our fantastic speakers. First, we will be hearing from Lawrence Matemba, who is the acting head of the Policy and Research Services branch in the Presidency in the Republic of South Africa. The main function of this role is to provide technical and content support to the principals in the presidency, particularly with regard to policy coordination, integration and coherence. So helping to enhance evidence-based, high-quality executive decision-making and driving some of the key cross-cutting policy initiatives. Lawrence is currently enrolled on the PhD in Leadership programme at the University of Pretoria with a focus on leadership capabilities that are required to be able to implement complex agendas. Then we will hear from Nico Mabunda, who is the Acting Deputy Director General for Human Resource Management and Development in the Department of Public Service Administration, also in South Africa, where he manages, oversees and facilitates human resource planning, employment, performance development, transformation and workplace environment right across the public service. With degrees in political science and public administration, public policy, international political economy and international relations, Nico is highly qualified to understand South Africa's policy landscape, economy, and the constraints faced by policy implementers and developers. Then we head over to Ghana, where we'll hear from Caroline Osu-Ajakum, who is a distinguished human resources leader with over 25 years of experience spanning across the UK and Ghana. She's currently the head of human resources at Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Training Centre, where she works with a diverse mix of military, police, and civil personnel. With her wealth of experience, Caroline has spent decades dedicated to professional development and passion for human rights, which have further enhanced her capacity to contribute meaningfully to both organisational goals and societal advancement. She's held academic and teaching positions and led work in think tanks and conducted numerous leadership training programmes. And Caroline has a special interest in youth, women and gender issues. And then last, but by no means least, we will hear from Dr. Nandi Madiba, who is Non-Executive Director of the Board and Chairperson of Human Capital Remuneration, Social and Ethics Committee in the South African Bureau of Standards. Nandi has more than 40 years of operational board and C-suite level experience across several industries, experience which is backed up by international exposure to various countries participating in dialogue in a whole range of issues, everything from corporate governance, cyber, technology, cross-border trade, right across to agriculture, public sector audit turnarounds, and her first employment was in the financial services sector in the early 80s. And Nandi has held several leadership level positions for almost 3 decades. So I'm sure you'll agree with me. I know I say this a lot, but today we really do have a stellar panel with us here today, 4 great speakers. Please do take this opportunity to ask your questions. Don't miss out on that opportunity. Use that Q&A button from at any time from now on. But now, without further ado, I'm going to go over to Lawrence. And Lawrence, I'm going to invite you to give some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Siobhan. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be dialing in from. As I've been introduced, my name is Lawrence Matemba from the Presidency in South Africa. I would like to, this afternoon, from the South African side, to reflect on some of the critical factors that have shaped South Africa's approach to implementing public service reform since 1994. When South Africa's democratic government replaced the previous apartheid administration. Now, as a developing country, the experience of South Africa promises to be relevant for other developing countries. Many papers on public service reforms focus on the conventional arguments for or against such reforms, and such analysis, while potentially appropriate for more developed countries, we do think that they do ignore the critical factors and choices facing South Africa. In fact, incorrect and unsustainable strategies are therefore frequently advocated for, and when problems do occur, it is easy to blame poor capacity, lack of information, or flawed implementation. Building capacity and improving information are part of the daily requirements that are facing practitioners in developing countries, particularly in Africa. Developing countries do not enjoy the luxury of carefully sequencing the public service reforms. Governments in developing countries are often forced to undertake critical political and economic reforms without sufficient capacity or information. Developing and implementing policy in this environment represents a major challenge made more difficult in the light of ever-present pressure to deliver services to poor communities. Now, there are always choices or dilemmas that we face in developing countries, particularly here in South Africa. The choice is a number of those. The first one, is it minimal or strong state? Which one do we go for? So given the history of apartheid and its legacy, there was not an automatic loyalty of the citizens, cooperation within the government, or true respect for legal or administrative decisions. Therefore, it has not been possible to jump straight into having modern management systems without previously establishing a solid base for democratic development. The classical hierarchical structured public administration and the respective accountability systems, South Africa has had to face special challenge because both the creation of a political democracy and the implementation of the principles of efficiency and effectiveness become crucial tasks of modernization at the same time. The second dilemma is, do we go for flexibility or stability in the public service reforms? So often there is an urge to push for flexibility as one of the goals in these reforms, as this is said to allow for adaptability, innovation, and responsiveness. In our case, there's an imperative to gain capacity and experience to administer a stable situation. If such capacity is missing, too much flexibility may lead to very risky outcomes. Thus, the challenge of public service reforms is to identify the most appropriate balance between flexibility and stability. The third dilemma is, should we go for deregulation or regulation? So in our context, once again, most of the life spheres have had to be built from the scratch. This process also required the establishment of many new laws, rules, regulations, and principles. In the situation where unpredictability is already high in society, rules and regulations are needed to counterbalance. Then there's the fourth dilemma, marketization or not. So there are those that favor the market approach to changing the public sector in South Africa, with a belief in the efficiency of markets as the mechanism for allocating resources within a society. So entrepreneurship, competition, privatization, and efficiency are key words that are used within this framework. Creating, through the constitution and laws, the best institutional framework under which exchanges between different actors may take place is thus amongst the first tasks for South Africa. Chair of the session, the next dilemma is on fragmentation or unity. A key challenge in undertaking public service reforms is the design and implementation of numerous structural policy and administrative reforms requiring constant exchange of information and keeping of a strategic view on the cross-stability of various policies and management tools. Therefore, the development of unit of public administration as well as common public service culture, such as the preservation of the public service with a distinctive status, culture, and conditions, as well as the recognition of strong state, are particularly relevant for South Africa. And then the final dilemma that we're reflecting on is the dilemma between democratic and technocratic values. The question is, in the public, when we go for public service reforms, should we pursue the 3 E's, that is economy, efficiency, and effectiveness, or should we rather pursue the 3 C's that underpin traditional administration, which is conduct, code of ethics, and culture? Which one should we go for? Do we have a choice between the two? Sometimes there might seem to be some contradiction. For example, several democratic goals, such as transparency, equal opportunities, access to public services, fair procedures, and citizen participation in decision-making may conflict with a more technocratic or rational goals, such as efficiency, effectiveness, value for money, or fast decision-making. Now, to conclude, Chair, some of these lessons seem to go against conventional wisdom, but from the perspective of a practitioner like myself, the real lesson is that a country cannot enjoy benefits of freedom and democracy without simultaneously reforming its public service. It must address the problems of capacity and information management simultaneously and ensure that the political system is responsive to the needs of society. So in the interest of time, Chair, thank you for the opportunity. That's the story that I've brought this afternoon, and I'm prepared and ready to engage. Thank you.
Lawrence,
Back to you.
perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to end where you ended. I start where you ended, I think, with that. Despite how difficult it is, and you've done a brilliant job of setting out, I think, the challenges facing you. This isn't a can we do it or not, it has to be done. Reform has to be done. You have to have a government that's responsive to the needs of your citizens. But you've really, it's a brilliant way to open, because I think you've picked out so many of the key challenges for countries like South Africa. As you say there, you can't often do reforms in the logical order that you want to. You don't yet have capacity in place, but you're having to make these decisions very quickly. And I picked out some of the key things you said there, some of the decisions you're having to make around the size of the state, a minimal state or a large state. Do you put flexibility over stability, or what's the right balance there? Do you regulate or deregulate? What's the role of the markets? Where do you privatize? Where don't you? That unity or fragmentation. So how much do you hold in the center? How much do you devolve? How much do you let go of? And then maybe that tension, as you're saying at the end, between things like the democratic versus the technocratic values. And I'll be interested, maybe the audience has thoughts on, is that a choice you have to make, or can you have a bit of all of those things? Lawrence, thank you so much. You've set out a really, really big overarching picture, I think, to set the conversations there. Nico, that's a hard act to follow, but I'm coming over to you now.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, and thanks to Lawrence. He said good afternoon. I have to say good evening, rather good night from where I am. It's almost 10 o'clock, quarter to 10. So good evening, colleagues, and thanks for joining us. We have a very limited amount of time, so I'll just go straight to the presentation that we have prepared. So everything that Lawrence said, whatever, and in fact, his closing statement makes it very, very easy for me, because it leads to what we are saying. We need to have a state that is capable, that is reformed, that is able to deliver on whatever decision that is made by the leadership of the country. So whatever the country decides on, it's something that the public service must be able to do. So what I've done, if we can go to the next slide, what I have done is we can pause this one, we can go to the mandate of the DPSA, as it speaks directly to the issue of transformation and reform. We first looked at the legislative mandate that speaks to what is it that we can do and what we can't do in terms of reforming the skills to boost, or rather building the skills to build the reform, the public service reform. So in terms of the Constitution, we are supposed to be the department that makes sure that the public service is effective and efficient in how it executes the lawful policies of the government. So the issue of transformation and reform is a legislative and constitutional imperative that the department is supposed to lead the public service on. So why do we need to implement skills development? The skills development that we need to have is to make sure that there are sufficient supply of skills that we have, so that we're able to manage and maintain a sufficient and capable skills base for the public service to be able to deliver on whatever decisions would have been taken by the government of the day. So that's very important for us. So we also have to make sure that the public service is responsive to the needs of South Africans. And that's a very critical part of us. That's why we have a slogan in the Department of Public Service that is supposed to guide the public service as a whole of Batupili. And Batupili means people first. So if we're able to put people first, we'll be able to deliver on exactly what we need to deliver on, especially what Lawrence has spoken about. So it's about capacity building, it's about developing the individuals that we have within the system. It's about coaching and leadership development. It's about learning and creating a learning environment for the public service. But most importantly, also supporting public servants to be able to acquire those skills that they need to acquire so that they're able to deliver what Lawrence spoke about. If we can go to the next slide, Raquel. You'll also see that in terms of how we have defined ourselves, we are in the midst of what we call public sector reforms that are anchored around professionalization. So professionalization for us is about providing a clear vision of how do we define the skills that we need, how do we then go about cultivating those skills so that we are able to have the next generation of public servants to drive what needs to be delivered on. So firstly, we have to be clear about what type of specialist skills do we need, what type of a professional do we need, how do we then devise those mechanisms to address those skills deficits that we have identified, how do we have appropriate staffing mechanisms so that even when we have acquired those skills, we are able to locate them correctly, where they are supposed to be located and where they are needed, so that you don't have a doctor being a communicator, not that they can communicate, but where we have to have them where they are supposed to be needed. But we also need to institutionalize the public sector as a career of choice so that it doesn't become a last resort. So if we create a learning environment for the public service and the public servants, then we become something that is more desirable for the public service so that we don't have to hide that you're a public servant. And that has to be guided by a career system that is based on meritocracy and an ethical disposition for the public servant. So we are now introducing a number of interventions that are going to also assist us to be able to reform our recruitment system so that we're able to have tools that can measure the ethical disposition of people that we're recruiting into the system, and we're able to claim and be sure that we can back up that information that these are the people that were the best in the environment and not only the best that are applying for the public service. So all of these, we call them are supposed to be state reforms to strengthen state capacity so that we're able to deliver as a public service and put people first. And the last part of it is that we are also looking at how we institutionalize. It's not enough for us that we're able to respond to pandemics and disasters, but we should be able to institutionalize those responses so that we don't have to create any special means to respond to disasters, but we're able to deliver and be able to do those things in a manner that allows us to function normally. If we move a little bit faster, Raquel, we can go to the next slide. And the next slide is about rethinking the public service. So for us, we have put the public service of the future at the center. And we have developed a new human capital strategy. We have started the process to conduct a skills audit for the public service so that when we talk about a new public service, we talk about a public service that is able to respond to the needs of the public in a manner that the public is able to appreciate that we're responding to those needs. We're talking about being tech savvy, we're talking about being collaborative, we're talking about being flexible so that we can also respond to, as Carolyn said, the Gen Z society that we have. And obviously the issue about mobility, are we able to create skills that will enable a public servant that will be able to move from one section to, or from one level to the next and be able to deliver. So all of these are in a manner trying to come up with the public service of the future, but also the public servant of the future, so that we're able to do all the things that we're supposed to do. We are also elevating what we call competencies. So what we used to refer to as soft skills, and how in recruitment and retraining. So those individuals that are already within the public service, we should be able to have the competencies. In South Africa, we have public servants on average have about 3 degrees, but we are not able to quantify yet what the competencies and the soft skills are. So we need to be able to speak to that. I'll skip this now, go to the next slide, so that we're able to close off in a manner that will make Chauvin to be happy with me. So I spoke about the human capital strategy for the new world of work. So in that way, we have said that we need to be able to strategize and plan for the skills that we need. And in the presentation, we have already spoken about what those things are in terms of responding to the needs of the public service, and the public servant, as well as the public itself. So we need to strategize and plan on how we identify the skills we need, how we manage the skills we have in the system, but also how do we keep the public servants skilled enough to be able to respond to the needs of the day. We're also talking about the issue of managing of talent. And when we talk about the move away from management of individuals to the management of talent, is about recognition of what the people are supposed to be doing who are employed in the public service, and how do we keep them engaged and so forth. If we skip this slide, we can go to the last slide, because I know that Chauvin will be not so happy with me now that we're actually going above the time. So the conclusion for us is about propelling why do we need to propel public sector reforms? So I'll just go to the highlighted areas. The first one is that we need to promote cross-sector partnerships and collaborations. So there won't be a possibility for us to develop the skills that we need to develop without partnerships. We need to understand civil society, community development organizations, universities have to be having a curriculum that responds to the needs of the public service, as well as the public as a collective. We also have to have an embrace agile methodologies that are supposed to develop skills, so that we elevate human resources to a strategic level. So human resources must be able to tell us, or human resource units, what type of skills do we have in the system, and that's why we have skills audits now that we're conducting, but also what type of skills we should be building and training for in the public service. We also have to adopt and implement human-centered design, so it shouldn't be about the systems that are already there, but what do the future of the public need, and so forth. The last big issue for us is about being centered around co-creation, platforms, AI, things like digital skills, modernization, and so forth. But then the big part of us to be able to deliver on that, we need to be able to have the capacity, to forecast the type of skills, but also to forecast the type of society that will be serving. In South Africa, we have the Agenda 2030, which is the National Development Plan, but it's ending in 5 years' time. So in 5 years' time, what do we have to do beyond that? What type of public servant must we have in the system for us to be able to deliver services? I think I'll leave it at that. We'll open up for conversations, and then we'll be able to take further those things. Thank you, Chauvin.
Thank you so much. I mean, a really good comprehensive run through. Interesting what you said there about the department where you are. Your role is to ensure that the public service is effective and efficient, and that actually the public sector can actually deliver on what the public and the elected leaders have chosen to do. Skills development being key for all of that. And some of the key things that I picked out there are the reforms, you say, are all anchored around that professionalization kind of approach, but also needing to stand back and say, well, what does that mean? What are the professions that you need? What are the new skills you need? Where do they need to sit in the public sector? Really interesting the way that you've said that I like the phrase you use, that people who work in the civil service or the public service shouldn't have to hide that fact. They should be proud of the fact that they're working in the public sector and that it's seen as a career of choice. So I'd be interested maybe in what the audience thinks. Is this as much a cultural shift as it is a skills shift as well? And then some of the other points that I picked up on there, you're saying you have to change the way you recruit, change the way you manage talent, looking at people being promoted on merit, and that really creating that kind of public service of the future that's tech savvy, flexible, more collaborative, the importance of partnerships, and ultimately that it's human centered and citizen focused as well. So a real rethink, I think, of the whole future of public service there. Thanks so much, Nico. Lots and lots of food for thought. To the audience, if you do have questions already, please message them in. And then Caroline, coming over to you now.
Okay, thank you so much, Ron. And I think for me, Lawrence and Nico have done the groundwork for me. I'll just take off from where Nico left off as to why the reform needs to be done. I think that all the examples that they've given, all the challenges that they've raised are not peculiar to any public sector. Especially across our part of the world, the issues about flexibility and stability. Ghana faces the same thing with the change of governments. One government starts a certain pattern of reform, and then a new government comes in, they don't continue it. Another government comes in, starts something totally different. And quite a lot of the reforms and the initiatives that have been started are left hanging. And usually resources become an issue in order to complete some of these things. Ghana is also looking at enhancing skill across all the agencies. Like Nico said, we are looking to attract the most professional or the most competent persons to come into our agencies and provide the requisite skills or the services that the citizenry needs. I would just highlight just a few things or challenges that Ghana has been facing when we talk about our public sector. It usually has to do with inefficiencies in service deliveries. And these stem from, several factors. One of them is the capacities of the persons who are actually performing these tasks. And then the manual processes, the bottlenecks, the bureaucracies, sometimes the corruptions that hinder the progress on access to the services that the citizenry are expecting from them. Like Lawrence was saying, you look at what is the best approach for the government to take. Is it something that is going to be more encompassing and flexible, or something that is going to create stability over the period? I think that Ghana looked at one of the things that Nico also mentioned when it comes to recruitment and creating or an enabling culture. So fostering a culture of continuous improvement and of shared values where transparency, objectivity come into play, so that those in the public sector have an understanding that this is the culture that we need to espouse and the culture that we need to work with within the area that we are in there. And be proud that they are part of the public sector providing these services or delivering these services to the citizenry. One of the things that government is also looking at is training and developing the capacities and competencies of the public sector. And for that matter, some institutions like Ghana Institute for Public Administration has been set up with the mandate to create specifically designed programs and courses to enhance public servants. and to ensure that they understand the leadership that they need to provide, the governance that they need to provide. We also have the Civil Service Training Center that also provides that training that is geared towards the Ghanaian public sector to ensure that the services that they are working to provide for the citizenry are done. I think that one of the things that we're also looking at as a country is maybe institutionalize our trainings so that they are formatted across agencies to ensure that the shared values that are being espoused cuts across all the agencies. And then maybe develop partnerships with other educational institutions outside the ones that the government has created to ensure that there's a continuum between the public and the private sector when it comes to training and development for its staff. Another area is technology. I mean, the way the world is moving right now, all services are using technology and then digitizing their processes and then enhancing the capacity of staff to be able to have the right skills to provide or access the technological availabilities that are there. There are quite a lot of initiatives when we look at technology. At the moment, the Ghana government is going on an e-governance initiative that is digitizing all the country's data, from health to social security to access of services. And it's provided into a card that gives you access to whatever agency you go to. That is supposed to enable us access or get the service that we need. So training and making it available to the public servants is something that they are also driving towards. Another area that we're looking at is ensuring that there are specific leadership and management programs for public servants so that they all go through the same processes to ensure that there's progression within them. When it comes to training, again, and tying it in with what Nico was talking about, the professionalism and the capacity within the service, we're looking at merit-based recruitments and promotions so that the right people are put in the right place. And those who are already in the system are encouraged to update themselves or upgrade themselves to be able to enable the best practices within the sector. I think that's what I can add on to, but maybe when the questions come, we can contribute from there as well. Thank you.
Caroline, thank you so much. Really interesting to have the view from Ghana. As you say, there's similar challenges, I think, as what we've heard from our colleagues in South Africa. The importance of stability, as you mentioned, especially when there's political change coming in all the time, disrupting things. How do you attract talent in that context? How do you look at your recruitment and retention kind of offers? Some of the challenges you mentioned there around the real inefficiency maybe across the public sector at the moment. So things like the capabilities of the staff who are currently in the system, corruption being an issue, manual processes and bureaucracy leading to kind of slack of pace in the system. So in that, how do you foster that culture of continuous improvement, which I think is what Nico and Lawrence were talking about as well. And then the importance of training and development. So as you were saying in Ghana, lots of things being set up. So new institute, the college for civil service, but also maybe developing partnerships with external providers, with the public sector on training. How do you make sure across the system that you've got shared values and standards in your training? And also, how do you look at things like what do leadership and management processes look like? Make sure people are going through the same kind of training systems, regardless of where they sit. And then also, as you brought in the issue of technology, going to be crucial, I think, in the modernization of public services in the reform agenda. But what does that mean for the skills that civil servants and public servants who are having to deliver that modernization program what are the technological skills that they are going to need to develop, and how do we do that? So again, loads of great stuff there, I think, for us to discuss in a moment. Thank you so much, Caroline. Nandi, coming over to you. You have to come off mute, Nandi.
Good afternoon and good evening and good morning to everybody. Taking into account that the world is flat, I will have to use all the times of the day to also accommodate our colleague. And also good afternoon to the participants. Mine is going to be very short because when you speak last, you find that people have already covered a lot of what you would have covered. And therefore, I'll try and be very short. But what is important is more from the perspective of digital transformation, that we are looking at how we enhance the public service and professionalize it in such a way that the benefit of these services to the public is done in a manner that would show that we've got talented workforce within the public service. Providing a public service delivered to meet the citizens' rights and demands can only be achieved if the public and civil servants possess the skills that are the best fit for the purpose within an environment that is professionalized. This requires continuous development of such skills, whereby talent management is prioritized as the environment within which the services are provided continues changing due to various factors. Also, the contributing factors continue changing. For purposes of today's engagement, the key contributing factor to such change is the paradigm shift brought by digital transformation into talent management within the public sector. Digital transformation is driving a paradigm shift in talent management within the public sector, and this is what I would like to really expand on. This shift involves the emergence of new skill sets, evolving job roles, data-driven talent management practices, agile work models, enhanced employee experiences, as well as significant cultural and organizational changes, taking into account that the work we do is about the data that we have to process into information. And also this is subjected to a lot of changes in terms of legislation. For instance, in South Africa, we have the POPI Act, and even in other countries, there are various acts or pieces of legislation that actually talk to data privacy, as well as the vulnerabilities that are there when we make use of technology in processing information. So I would then say, by embracing these changes, the public service can effectively manage its workforce and meet the demands of a rapidly evolving digital landscape. From the perspective of today's engagement, let me maybe limit these comments more onto the digital transformation and talent management in the context of professionalization of the public sector. I'm not going to repeat what that means because the previous speakers have already touched it on. But if I can just maybe at a very high level talk to digital transformation in terms of us taking it from the same perspective, because even in terms of research, the definitions are many, and therefore it's important for me to define it from the perspective of today's deliberations. Digital transformation is more referred to as the integration of digital technology into all areas of a business, fundamentally changing how businesses operate and deliver value to customers. One may look at the term customers as not necessarily relevant for this, but I always say to professionalize the public sector, we have to always take ourselves as being in business and therefore refer to the beneficiaries of our services, the civil society, the taxpayer whose money we're utilizing to render the service. If we refer to them as customers, we will then take into account that a customer is always right and a customer must get what the customer is looking for, delivered on time and at a price that is expected by the customer. So once we integrate into the culture, the word customer, then we will also look into how we professionalize the public sector so that customers are always treated as important. But more, the focus of digital transformation is on leveraging digital technologies, and there are many that I can actually cover. You've got your mobile apps, you've got cloud computing, big data analytics, Internet of Things, you've got artificial intelligence, and in most cases, studies around AI take it as if it is the technology and not that it is just one of the technologies that we utilize. So you will find that we'll say AI all the time without really unpacking the fact that it is just one element of the ecosystem of digital transformation, and it is just one of the digital technologies that are actually utilized. And the primary objective of this digital transformation is actually improving operational efficiencies, increasing agility and innovation, as well as enhancing customer experience, while ensuring that in terms of how we do business, we still remain competitive and even enhance that competitiveness, because even services that are rendered by the public sector are available in the private sector. It's just that the cost will be higher because it's not a public good for them. In the private sector, they are there to make profits. Maybe in terms of the complete ecosystem of digital transformation, which I've already indicated that it goes beyond AI, this encompasses a broad range of these digital technologies that I've already spoken to. And I think I need to also go further to say, if then in the public sector, we don't let the service, in terms of the civil servants, always define the ecosystem of digital transformation, we will end up looking at them being afraid of the fact that automation of processes is meaning loss of employment in relation to them. And yet, if they are actually involved in terms of the understanding of this ecosystem of digital transformation, and this is also integrated into the talent management, that will actually assist, because then they become an owner in championing this change, in integrating this digital transformation into talent management. And realistically, if change management is not built into this program, and also in mapping the digital transformation, it therefore means we will not be letting people understand where the shift is. If we accept that there's a paradigm shift brought by digital transformation, it therefore means that is a change in itself. Even automating functions within an environment is actually a change, because it's either you replace a person with processes that are automated, or the same person will be there, but the same person has to be doing this, performing these activities differently because of making use of artificial intelligence tools or any other technologies that might be there. Therefore, the element of change management is very critical, so that you can prepare that mindset of the people to ensure that they also own up in regard to this. In terms of the talent management, I will talk to the fact that in terms of the strategies that we have to professionalize the public sector, as well as knowledge management frameworks that are there, we are actually talking a lot about attracting the right skill, qualified personnel, ensuring that our recruitment processes in the public sector are such that they are able to attract that right skill, which is best fit for purpose. However, when it comes to the continuous development, taking into account the changing environment, we're not prioritizing an enabling environment that needs to be created, because part of that mapping should encompass creating an enabling environment, which should then be that continuous development of the workforce, and also the retaining of that talent that we already have, by ensuring that we assist them to move away from the anxiety of machines replacing people, but to understanding that they have to make use of those machines to actually render the service, and not that they see those machines as more a replacement. Therefore, we need to integrate into all these frameworks, the professionalization, the knowledge management frameworks. We need to integrate talent management approach that is comprehensive, that will take into account a roadmap that shows how this digital transformation needs to be integrated. However, there's also an aspect that I would like to emphasize, is the risk management aspect of this digital transformation, so that the workforce is also aware of what else they need to be learning as part of them developing within their environment, so that the vulnerabilities to which they get exposed through the use of technologies or digital technologies, as well as an element of artificial intelligence that is driven in a lot of sectors, they understand how to respond to those vulnerabilities, risks that are actually relating to them as individuals, as employees, but also risks that relate to the society they serve. You know, for many examples, even in the private sector, where data is actually stolen through hacking, and therefore you get the society exposed to those vulnerabilities because their data is actually out there without them having given a consent, without them even being aware, and it can be used for wrong reasons. But beyond that continuous development, I need to also touch at the level of role of governance structures, because as you will imagine, not only within the government departments, but also the entities out there, the governance structures that are having a duty to give strategic direction are actually needing to make it a point that they have an understanding that will let them lead by example and set the tone from the top in terms of how this digital transformation is integrated, including the expertise and competency at that level of governance of what digital transformation means and what is actually it's bringing. If you come from a political point of view, you will hear statements about a civil service that is bloated and everything, it needs to be reduced and so on. But we don't take into account the fact that certain services that are rendered are also revenue generating. And there are those that are cross-subsidized by those that are revenue generating because they are not revenue generating. But now if operational efficiencies are such that use of digital technologies are letting that these services are rendered at a speed and at a lower cost, it therefore means even the service to society will improve because the turnaround will be reduced due to these efficiencies, and the cost will have been reduced because operational efficiencies will cascade from digital transformation. But again, are we letting the workforce also have the same understanding? Are we letting the governance structures also have the same understanding so that we move together and we are able to even render better services at a quicker turnaround with people that are not having anxiety that automating processes is there to take away their jobs, but people that understand that they will render a better service and also obtain better trust by the public because they are able to have quicker turnarounds and they are able to even understand how they can actually deal with information that belongs to the public. How will that also protect and benefit the public? I think I will end there before I exceed the time limit that I've been given. Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Nandi, thank you so much. Echoing some of what our other speakers have said about the need to professionalize, about the need to make sure that the skills match the needs of the challenges facing the public service today, but very much focusing in on digital transformation. And as you've said there, I think the digital transformation and the emergence of some of these new technologies is really going to be a paradigm shift, you called it. So it's going to impact on everything, change everything in terms of the roles that we have in the civil service and the public service, the skills that we need, the culture across the service, but also organizational structures as well. And it will impact on everything from how we manage our data to some legislative changes that might need to take place. I think you're saying there that public servants are going to have to embrace these new technologies if they want to meet these challenges, but they're also going to have to get better at managing the risks around some of the new technologies as well. And that issue, I think, which the audience might resonate with, because quite often when we talk about new technology and AI, I think some civil servants and public servants are quite scared. They're quite fearful of the impact that some of these new technologies might have on their own jobs and on the workforce. But as you say, as part of that change management program, it should be seen as part of this wider strategy to kind of develop skills and shift to new skills that our public servants are going to need. So it should be part of that talent management and skills development picture in the round. And then I think really ending there with the important point of the importance of leadership as well in all of this. So thank you to our 4 brilliant speakers for setting the scene. Please do send in your questions. I have a couple of questions myself, which is, we've talked about skills development. We've talked about the need to professionalize. I'm just going to ask all of you very quickly. I mean, if you could sort of name maybe 1 or 2 skills that you think civil servants from now and in the future are going to need to have that maybe they didn't need to have 10 years ago? What would you say are going to be the biggest changes in terms of the types of skills that you would be looking for when you recruit new public servants and civil servants? I will change the order a little bit in future, but Lawrence, we haven't heard from you for a while, so I'm going to come back to you first on this question.
No, thank you so much for the brilliant question. I mean, as my fellow panelists have spelled out, the world is constantly changing, and so are the needs of the citizens that the public service is meant to serve. So we have to keep up. The public service has to keep up with the needs of the citizens. Technology, I think, has come in quite handy, and it's also moving very fast. So the kind of public servants that we are looking at are those that are able to embrace technology and be able to move. I mean, in my situation, I deal with a lot of data. So someone who is able to have insights into those big, huge amounts of data. And from again, my perspective, for me to be able to provide that advice to my principals, it's really about weighing options, scenario planning. So it's those kinds of skills really that that I would look into moving forward.
Thanks, Lawrence. And Nico, so building on what Lawrence said, I can see when we recruit new people into the service that we could expect them to have certain kind of digital and data skills. But how realistic is it for maybe a civil servant who's been in the service for 20, 30 years? Are we expecting them seriously to retrain and gain all of these new skills?
Thanks, Siobhan. I think we do unfortunately have to expect them to gain and retrain one way or the other. That's why we need to come up with new methodologies on how we train people. In fact, one of the pillars in the professionalization framework for the public service is about the reorientation of public servants. So we have to deal with that. In terms of the big skills that we think we should be having, one of them is the forecasting, being able to do scenario planning. So that is a key thing for us. I think we've spoken about how much we'll need to have that to be able to deliver on, firstly, to identify the skills that are required, as well as to plan for those skills. So if we know what type of services will need to be delivered in the next 10 years, we'll then be able to do the skills that needs to be done. In terms of our research, in terms of the tools that we use currently, we are also identifying the issue of leadership as a big problem of the skills that are currently required in the public service. And then I think personally, lastly, but it's also part of the data that we are seeing in the system, is the issue of project and contract management. So our ability as government to plan, deliver services and deliver at a cost that is efficient and effective is quite critical if we're going to be to remain relevant as the public service. Thanks, Siobhan.
Thanks. Caroline, your thoughts on kind of training current civil servants as well as recruiting in new skills? What are the skills you're going to be looking for, and how do you skill up? I know you said you have new things being set up in Ghana, but do you have the resources to be able to skill up current civil servants and public servants?
Yes. Just to tap into what Nico also said, the areas that we're also looking at are of course project management, leadership development, which is also a very big one, and then digital literacy, and another one is financial management. Financial management across the agencies. What we've realized is that with a gap in competencies and skill, it becomes a little bit of a challenge when we need to scale up and provide the requisite services. So like the Ghana Institute of Public Administration that has been set up to specifically design programs and initiatives when it comes to learning and upgrading of skills for public servants. What they do is they ensure that as times are changing and upgrades are taking place, they skew their training to target the public services and provide the gaps that they find in there. One of the things that we're also looking at is data analytics, working with the data that has been analyzed and produced to help with forecasting and workforce planning, to see that in the next 5 years, this category of the workforce will be retiring. What is needed to fill in these gaps? So succession planning and workforce planning are also a good gap fillers. When you talk about resources, like I said, with us, our challenge has been the stability and continuity when it comes to the reforms that are initiated by successive governments. So at the moment, we do have a budget that is targeting training and development, and part of the initiative to do e-governance within the sector to ensure that as the world is changing and evolving, we are also tapping into the technological advances that are there. Yeah.
Thanks, Caroline. And Nandi, I know it's not fair to come to you last, so you can answer that question on the skills, but also I'm going to give you a new question as well, which you can, because you mentioned leadership and the importance of kind of leadership at the top, setting the scene. When it comes then to thinking about skills, do you think leaders know enough about the skills that are going to be needed? And in particular, do you think leaders have a digital literacy that they need? So Lawrence mentioned there that he has to provide now insights to kind of senior people in the public service. So would you start with maybe senior people in terms of skills development? Would that be a place that you would start? And do you think that's an area where more focus is needed?
Thank you so much for that question. I was smiling as you were asking, because you've stolen my thunder by making reference to leadership, because it's one of the things I wanted to actually start with, to say the skills that are required are actually more about leadership, and leadership at multiple levels, not leadership where you've got subordinates to lead at a particular level, whether middle management, but going up to the governance structures. So that is why quite critical that leadership skill is required. And maybe before I come to the latter part of the question, I think the other part that is important as part of the skills is where people are having adaptability. Because if you have adaptability, you will embrace change. And if you embrace change, you will communicate what needs to be communicated. So coming out of that skill of being adaptable, I think it's something that we all need to ensure that we have, not only at leadership level, just all of us taking into account the way matters are changing, the developments in the digital era. So we need to have that. Now, let me leave that part about the digital competencies and come to whether leaders know if they are really having to be pursuing this path. I'm believing that at governance level, I've actually written a paper which is not yet published, it's still going through peer review, where I was talking exactly about having a framework whereby we ensure that leaders are leading by example. They are the first ones to actually understand what this paradigm shift brought by digital transformation is, and what is it that a professionalization of the public sector is meaning in terms of their own governance responsibilities. And as part of the interviews that I had conducted, I had observed, or maybe let me say the core findings, were that most boards, when you were speaking about digital transformation, looked at you as talking about an ICT committee within the board or ICT steering committee within management. And yet we are saying leverage on technology to drive digital transformation, but out there is also an interpretation that digital transformation, you are just talking about technology. But the other aspect that I think is important for us to touch on is the fact that we may think that society is digital illiterate. I don't want to believe that they are. I think it depends on how we unpack this. Even a Magogo or Granny that is just living on a grant has got a smartphone, and they're making use of those smartphones on a number of occasions. So I think what is important is that even the old workforce needs to be taken through a process of understanding. When we say digital technologies, what is that? And what are the applications that can be utilized so that they know that they are already digital illiterate, but the illiteracy might be there at a very low level, but we still need to unpack it and have an assessment done. And even at leadership level, that assessment needs to be done so that we can assist at various levels. Thank you.
Thanks, Nandi. I think some people are having trouble with the questions. We're looking into it, but as far as we can see, the Q&A is fine. So please do keep trying to get your questions in. Use the Q&A function, not the chat function, just to say to the audience there. I want to come back with another question that we had come in, and actually it's a great question because you all mentioned this in your opening remarks. And this is to do with, how do you ensure that people have the skills to be as responsive as possible to the citizen? And I think this is a cultural shift as much as anything. And I know from other webinars that we've had that I think some civil service leaders struggle with the fact that in the past, staff have essentially done as they're told. They've been told to do something, they've done it, they don't really think much more about it, they do what they're told to do. How do you shift the mindset so that you have a workforce who are thinking about putting the citizen at the heart of everything they do? And maybe, as you say, being more adaptable, maybe more innovative in their approach. So just your thoughts really on that cultural shift, moving away from just a technocratic, bureaucratic approach to a real citizen-focused, focus on delivery approach. And is this something you can do through training? Again, I'm going to shift the order up a little bit. Caroline, I'll come to you first on this one.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I think for us, one of the things that we're looking at is instilling values to ensure that those who are providing the service understand why they are there, and they all adhere or believe in the values that has been espoused for them. So implementing strict codes of ethics, of leadership, creating an organizational culture that puts the client or the customer first, and then putting in maybe monitoring and accountability mechanisms to ensure that there's reviews and feedback on how services were delivered and what the satisfaction rate is for those who went through those processes or accessed those services, to ensure that there's a fostering of public trust and the service deliveries that is done. So ensuring that there's a strict code of conduct that everybody has to go through, has to espouse and embody, and then reviews the feedback mechanisms and accountabilities and monitoring of how these services are delivered.
And actually, I meant to pick up on, because Lawrence, you mentioned in your opening remarks the importance of trust, and given the history in a country like South Africa as well, the importance for public servants to rebuild trust with citizens, I think absolutely crucial, I think, in all of this in terms of development of skills. And you can answer that question as well about cultural shift, but I'm conscious of time and that we're running short of time. And we've got a great question that's coming, which I think is an ideal final question as well. It's come in from Lusana, who has said, simply, I really like this, what is an ideal public servant? So in your mind, what makes an ideal public servant, and what will an ideal public servant be looking forward? Nico, I'll start with you on that one, and you can talk about culture as well if you like, but we do only have 10 minutes left.
I really thought and hope that you were going to ask someone else.
You can't get
And,
out of it, Nico. I've come to you first.
No, Lusani, thank you, Madziwandela, for that brilliant question. I think for me, maybe earlier today, I attended an executive business class at the National University of Singapore, and we were looking at strategy. And one of the biggest things that we were looking at is how to change the attitudes, the culture and the approach of individuals to work, first of all. And one of the arguments that we had were the global audience there in the class. And one of the things that we agreed on is that the most difficult thing to do is to change people. So changing people is quite difficult. So it's a constant struggle that we'll have to have especially at the government level, because we have had this culture that says in government you won't be fired, you won't be disciplined, you won't be held accountable, all those type of things. So it starts from the top, from the political leadership to the director generals, or what you will call the permanent secretaries in the UK, but it starts from the top. If they start to behave in a manner that will give hope to the public, where they are held accountable and so forth, we can then change the culture and start introducing the issue of accountability into the system. So that having been said, it will take time. Now, to move to Lusani's question, what is an ideal public servant? I think for me, and if we're talking about an ideal public servant, well, I'm going to go to the ideal, to the extreme ideal. It's someone who is responsive, it's someone who is accountable, and it's someone who then delivers what they're supposed to deliver. So doing what you have to do during the time that you are being paid to do, using public funds, So it's a little bit idealistic, but that is what we are supposed to do. If we can be able, we were just a last comment. Last year, we tried to introduce a remote working framework for the public service. And the only reason we're not able to do it is because the then minister asked me as an individual to say, what do public servants do today now that they're working here in the office? And I couldn't answer. So if we can be able to say at each and every time or second of the 8 hours that we're being at work, what is it that we're doing, we'll be able to be an ideal public servant. Thank you.
Thanks, Nico. And I know you say that's ideal and extreme, but actually being responsive, accountable, and delivering on what you're supposed to deliver isn't that extreme when you think about it. That's kind of what...
Exactly, yeah.
Thanks. Nandi, your thoughts, I know we are running out of time, but your thoughts on what's an ideal civil servant or public servant, and if you did have any thoughts on changing culture.
Thank you so much. I think let me start with the first one in terms of the ideal one. I think it must be a one that is service oriented, so that you remember why you get that salary there, because you are there to render a service, and you must render the service as expected and demanded by the public, who is there utilizing own tax money to actually compensate you for the service. So you must be proud to receive the compensation, knowing that the service for which you are being compensated is actually appreciated by the person that received the service. And then the other part would be maybe citizen-centric employee of the government. When I'm saying citizen-centric, I'm meaning you mustn't forget that who comes first in regard to the service you are rendering is actually the member of the public. So now, why you are there is to ensure that government deliver on the services that it has pledged in terms of its mandate and the constitution to the public. Therefore, you must know that the citizen comes first. Now, coming to more the latter part, I'm believing that when it comes to trying to let people adapt to change, you need to ensure that they are actually involved. They will embrace change if they participate in the actual change and they see a need. And in so doing, integrate your planning, because if the planning is not integrated into this program of trying to professionalize the public sector, and you are also not integrating resource planning, then we may end up with some of these activities being part of the plan, but we are actually unable to deliver on them. And yet we can still make use of digital technologies to ensure that we enhance the speed, the quality, as well as the platforms to communicate what is it that we are doing and meet the expectations of the public and rebuild that culture and trust, and ensuring as well that an expectation gap is closed, because the public is sitting there with an expectation that, but now there's digital transformation. Why are these people not making use of digital technologies to ensure that they render the service quicker, there's quality and everything? So we also need to ensure that we've got those I would say public servants that understand that they have a duty to actually bridge that public expectation gap by rendering the service as expected and with a turnaround that is fair. Thank you.
Thanks, Nana. Yeah, that issue of raising public expectations is a really, really important one. So Lawrence, over to you. We've heard responsive, accountable, deliver on what they're supposed to deliver. And then Nandi added having that public service values right at the heart of what they do and being citizen-centered. Do you want to add anything in terms of what's your ideal public servant?
So it's everything that the fellow panelists have spoken about. I think in addition it's about someone who is able to connect with the citizens. I mean, it shows if you are sincere, even though you may not be able to provide the solution they're looking for, if you come across as sincere and trying your best to reach out, people will see through you how that you're a true public servant. And one of the things that we are doing in South Africa is to encourage public servants to go out to communities, even if it's not to provide a service, but just to familiarize themselves with what communities are all about. I think that will go a long way, because we are used to citizens coming to us to seek services, but we can also go to them and identify ourselves with them. So it's just beyond the core of duty, in short.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Lawrence. I love that. Be sincere. I think that authenticity point really important. And what you said about go out to communities and connect with citizens, it makes me think of Cabinet Secretary we had when I was in the civil service. Lord Gus O'Donnell used to say, if you want to get up, you need to get out. You need to get out of Whitehall and actually get out into the community and understand what people's lives are like and what they want. Thanks, Lawrence. And then finally, Caroline, you already mentioned about the culture thing, but did you want to add anything in terms of what's your ideal public?
I think my fellow panelists have said most of it. The little I'll add is maybe include some incentivization or merit-based within the system that promotes an accountable, service-centric public service, where those who provide the service, they climb up the ladder when there's a connection. You know, we talk about ideal, but when you go to the private sector, those who do well are high performers. Those who are able to achieve the goals, those who are able to provide the service with a smile, those who go the extra mile to ensure that their customers or their clients are satisfied. If that approach is brought into the public service, we find that maybe there might be a shift. But as with any change, there's usually resistance. But like Nandi said, if it's inclusive and participatory, then everybody is on board. And then the process might be a little smoother. Thank you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much, all of you. We are out of time, I'm afraid. That conversation went really, really quickly. But thank you so much to our four speakers. It's been a fantastic conversation. I think really given me hope that although there is a lot to do, I think, and a lot to be developed, lots of reforms to make, as long as we include people, as you've all said, in that process and build it into change management and embrace all of those new technologies with all the risks involved, I think there's lots of potential, I think, for modernising our services in a way that then will ultimately benefit the citizens. Thank you so much to Caroline, to Lawrence, to Nico and to Nandi. Fantastic conversation. To our audience, we have sent you a short questionnaire. If you wouldn't mind taking a couple of minutes just to complete that, we'd be hugely grateful here at GGF, because it means we can keep giving you the webinars that are of most value to you on the topics you want to hear about the most. We will also be sending to everybody who registered today a link with the video, so you can watch it all again or share it with your colleagues who weren't able to watch it live. And it will be up on the website, so you can watch that on demand as well. And we will be sending all of you in a week or so a kind of write-up of the key points that came out of today's conversation. So you can have that and share that amongst your networks as well. But thank you to all of you, wherever you are. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I hope to see you all on another one of our webinars very soon. Thanks to the panel. Goodbye for now. Cheers.
Good night.